Hey everyone, I'm Jonah,
I'm Connor.
and welcome back to Rank and File Sports. It'll be a new look for USC in 2025 as Miller Moss is transferring to Louisville. However, he will be replaced by Jaden Mayava, who started the last four games of the season. And aside from a few interception problems, he did look pretty solid. So there's definitely some hope for USC to improve in 2025. Looking at the schedule, few tough games on here, mostly concentrated towards the middle of the season with that stretch of Illinois, Michigan, and Notre Dame. But also got to watch out for the road trip to Oregon near the end of the season. Seven games are going to be at home, though, for the Trojans, and their schedule difficulty will be a 7 out of 10.
Starting the season off, it's going to be an easy first couple games, first three games. I would easily see the Trojans going 3-0. Missouri State getting bumped up to the FBS level, and USC is going to be a tough one, especially at home. That's going to be a tough environment for them to play in their first ever FBS game. 100% chance for the Trojans to start the year off with a win. Georgia Southern the following week, also at home. That's going to be a long road trip for Georgia Southern. And skill wise, USC is going to be at the top. Lincoln Riley, even though there have been some doubts over the last couple seasons because we haven't seen USC return to that playoff caliber team that we've seen in past years. Really, the last time we saw it was with Caleb Williams in his first, or I guess it was his only Heisman season, but in his Heisman season where they did end up losing to Utah in that Pac-12 championship that knocked them out of the college football playoffs. But I think Lincoln Riley has a lot left in the tank. I don't think, despite whatever may have happened in the past couple seasons at USC, I don't think he's a bad head coach. And I think this is gonna be a good season for him to prove that he still has a lot left. Georgia Southern is gonna be another easy win for him. 100% chance there. Then their first road game, their first Big Ten game, starting off really, really easy, playing the worst team in the Big Ten at Purdue. 95% chance here for the Trojans, and that's it should be 100%, but just because it is a Big Ten and conference game, we're not gonna guess.
I just meant for you to finish that, and then I was going to take over at Michigan State.
Oh, damn. Well, okay. Really should be an 100% chance here, but just because it is a Big Ten conference game, we don't like to give 100% chances to anyone because any given Saturday you can have something happen. We've seen miracles be pulled off throughout the years, and maybe Purdue is able to shock the world here, but we're not thinking that's going to happen. So 95% chance for the Trojans to start the season off 3-0 here.
Yeah, and then after that, you got Michigan State at home. Aiden Childs returning at the quarterback position, and he is a very talented player overall, but definitely had a lot of issues last season with turnovers and really just being consistent. So a lot of this game is going to depend on how well he can play. But regardless, I do think that USC is going to be favored. Home field advantage is going to be big here with how far Michigan State has to travel. This one's about a 70% chance for a USC win. After that, going on the road to Illinois, and the Illini are going to be one of the better teams in the Big Ten next season. They have a pretty easy schedule, not quite as easy as Indiana's last year. So playoffs might be out of the question. But overall, it's a very talented team. The fact that USC has to go on the road is not going to help in this one. Only a 30% chance at a win heading into their first bye week. After that, you got Michigan at home. The Wolverines, one of the more difficult teams to predict next season. It's unknown whether or not they actually are going to start Bryce Underwood at the quarterback position. And there's also been a lot more stuff coming out around their sign stealing scandal, which potentially could cause some punishments over this offseason, which maybe changes some of our views on Michigan's performance next season. For right now, we are going to favor Michigan in this game, even though USC's at home. about a 35% chance, but that's one of the games that could potentially fluctuate here for USC. And then after that, going back on the road for another really difficult road trip here to face Notre Dame. They almost pulled it off against the Fighting Irish last year with about 3.5 minutes left. They were on the goal line with a chance to tie it before Maava threw a pick six, and then he threw another pick six the next drive, which ended up putting the game out of reach. This year, still going to be really tough. Notre Dame's going to be a really, really solid team once again. After all, they made the national championship last season, and they're bringing back quite a few pieces from that team. We only have about a 20% chance of a USC win in this game. Next up is Nebraska on the road following their second bye week. This one just going to slightly favor USC here, but about a 55% chance to pick up a win over the Huskers in Memorial Stadium.
Following week, they'll face the Northwestern Wildcats at home. Northwestern is probably the second worst team in the Big Ten. Maybe you can make an argument for Maryland just because they've struggled since Tua Tagovailoa's brother has left the team. But Northwestern has not been able to bounce back after being a pretty solid team a couple of years ago, back when the Big Ten still had divisions and they were a pretty consistent team to make a Big Ten title game or at least compete for one. But with the abolition of the divisions, Northwestern has kind of fallen out. And I don't see them being very competitive in this one. Maybe they have a couple key guys coming in out of the transfer portal or recruiting, but compared to USC and with it being at USC, I don't think Northwestern has much of a chance in this one, giving the Trojans a 70% chance to get a win here. Then they'll welcome Iowa, and this is going to be another interesting game. Iowa obviously has been a very defensive minded team, basically, as long as I can remember. Offensively, I don't see them being that good of a team. I know they're bringing in, what's his name, Mark Gronowski, um, from South Dakota State. Is that where he's from? I can't remember if he's from South Dakota State. He's from, yeah, Mark Gronowski from South Dakota State. I was bringing in Mark Gronowski from South Dakota State after being very successful in the FCS and bypassing the NFL draft to play one more season at the FBS level with Iowa now. I think he's going to bring a much needed spark to the Iowa offense, but I think with the potential that USC has, I think they're still going to be the better team if Jaden Mayava can limit his turnovers and lean on having both of USC's best receivers coming back at in their prime too. Both Makai Lemon and Jacoby Lane finished their sophomore seasons as the top two wide receivers at USC, with a lot of people transferring out. Obviously, you had Zachariah Branch transferring to Georgia. You have Kyron Hudson transferring to Penn State, and you have Deuce Robinson transferring to Florida State. So it's going to hurt the depth a little bit, but when you have two young studs like USC does, it's not really going to matter. So I think offensively, USC is going to be able to blow Iowa's defense out of the water here. But just because Iowa has shocked teams in the past, we're not going to put it totally out of reach for the Hawkeyes, giving the Trojans a 60% chance to get a win here. Then they'll go on the road for the final time this season, facing the Oregon Ducks. Ducks are coming off of an undefeated regular season, finishing it as the number one team during the regular season, getting that much sought after first round bye in the playoffs, and then lost to the eventual national champions in Ohio State at the Rose Bowl. Returning a lot of key guys from that team, did get a lot of good recruits as well, including flipping a couple of people from dominant programs. But the biggest concern for Oregon is who is replacing Dylan Gabriel at the quarterback position. Right now, it's looking like it's going to be Dante Moore, who was a starter at UCLA 2 years ago. Had some decent numbers, but there have been some questions about can he produce the same way that Dylan Gabriel did last year and solve some of the questions that a lot of people have posed about his play. But I think with Dan Lanning as his head coach, being in his ear all the time and being the offensive mastermind that he is, I think he's going to succeed very well in this Oregon offense. I think it's going to be a very similar team that we saw last year. So this is going to be an uphill battle for the Trojans just because the Trojans are a pretty young team and we have seen what the Trojans defenses have looked like in the past. So I think the Trojans are not going to be favoring this one. It's probably going to be a pretty big win for Oregon, especially with it being at Oregon. Even Trojans a 20% chance here. Then finishing the season off against UCLA. UCLA has been a really disappointing team the past couple seasons. One of the bottom teams in the Big Ten right now. I don't see them being very competitive in this one. I think the skill gap is just way too wide between who UCLA has and who USC has. So I think the Trojans are going to get the job done here as well, giving them a 75% chance to win this rivalry game.
Taking a look at the schedule as a whole, there's really only four games that stick out to me. Illinois, Michigan, Notre Dame, and Oregon. Obviously, four toughest games on the schedule. Maybe you look at Nebraska as well. Um, I think no matter what, we're probably going to see USC lose four games, but I could see them finishing, 7-5 to 8-4, somewhere in there.
Yeah, I think that's a good prediction for this Trojans team. I think they can easily compete with teams like Michigan and Illinois. It's going to be a very interesting game to watch. I think both those teams are kind of at the same level that USC is at. Maybe some are a little bit higher because they have a little bit more experience, especially with Illinois retaining Luke Altmaier as their quarterback next season. But I mean, there's a good amount of conference games that could go either way. Nebraska's not going to be an easy one. Iowa could be an interesting one. Even the rivalry game against UCLA, you never know what's going to happen. But yeah, I could see this USC team going 7-5, 8-4, maybe getting to 9 wins if they are able to knock off a couple of the top Big Ten teams.
Last season, the Trojans went 7-6, and our projection for this year is actually just a little bit above that, with 7.3 projected wins based off of all of those percentages. And we are going to go with 8-4 as our prediction for USC. Like we were saying, this one really between 8-4 and 7-5 for us. But I think there's a good chance they can pull an upset, maybe lose a game they shouldn't, finish around that 8-4 mark. Vegas is just slightly favoring the over 7.5 as well, with minus 150 or minus 118 odds. So just barely, barely agreeing with us on that one for an 8-4 record for USC. So thank you guys for watching. Please make sure to like and subscribe, and we'll see you in our next video.